Hello everyone and welcome to Music Theory with Gem. In this installment of Analyzing Melody, we're going to delve into the world map theme from Kingdom of the Dump, which is an SNES-styled RPG that is currently in development. For more information on this title and the theme's composer, William Kage, check the description or comment section below. The theme is set in the tonality of B-flat with its mode being minor. Harmonically, the theme makes use of only 4 different chords. In the first section we hear B-flat minor, the 1, and C-flat major, the chromatic flat 2. In the second section we hear G-flat major, the flat 6, and F minor, the 5. Notice that in the first pair we hear a minor chord ascending by semitone to a major chord, and in the second pair we hear a major chord descending by semitone to a minor chord. Structurally, the harmonies are, for the most part, B-flat minor and G-flat major, the 1 and flat 6, with C-flat major and F minor operating as prolongational neighbor chords that expand the sound of the tonic and submediant areas. By the end of the theme, however, F minor will attain the status of a structural harmony, and this will largely be a result of the melodic design, which we're now going to delve into. In the first phrase, we hear a core idea that consists of only the note F. In the first embellishing layer, we hear B-flat minor stated horizontally with F descending to D-flat and then B-flat, followed by an ascending leap to the structural F. In the second embellishing layer, we hear F embellished by its lower neighbor tone, E-flat. We then hear D-flat embellished by both its lower and upper neighbor tones, C and E-flat. Notice here that C is given emphasis as the preparatory D-flat occurs on a weak beat, and C occurs on the downbeat of the following measure with significant duration. Following the resolve to D-flat, we hear B-flat embellished by its incomplete lower neighbor tone, A-flat. In the second phrase, the core idea is G-flat descending to E-flat. In the first embellishing layer, we hear G-flat descend to E-flat. Make note, however, that this motion to E-flat is not the same as the structural descent to E-flat in the following measure. This is due to its metric placement within the phrase and, more importantly, the return to G-flat. In the second embellishing layer, we have, again, a mixture of neighbor tones that are complete and incomplete. The only complete neighbor tone is F, the lower neighbor tone of G-flat, in the initial measure. Following this, we hear 3 separate instances of incomplete neighbor tones, which are D-flat, an incomplete lower neighbor tone of E-flat, A-flat, an incomplete upper neighbor tone of G-flat, and lastly F and D-flat, which form an incomplete neighbor group of E-flat. In this final instance, F operates not only as part of a neighbor group, but also as an indirect passing tone connecting G-flat to E-flat. Phrases 3 and 4 essentially repeat phrases 1 and 2, respectively. The only difference is that in the fourth phrase we hear additional notes, but they are used to lead into the following phrase. As a result, we're going to move straight into the fifth phrase with the anacrusis added. And in the fifth phrase, the core idea is B flat ascending to C. In the first embellishing layer, we hear a number of chord tones used to create unfolding intervals. The first tones, E flat and G flat, belong to the preceding flat 2 chord, C flat major, and, as mentioned before, they are used to lead into the first measure of the phrase. We then hear B flat move to and from D flat, followed by a complete arpeggiation of F minor. Notice that F, the root of F minor, appears as an anticipation and sounds atop G flat major, the flat 6. In the second embellishing layer, we hear F used as a passing tone to connect E flat to G flat in the anacrusis, and we also hear B flat used as a passing tone to connect A flat to C in the third measure. In the first and second measures, we hear C and E flat form an incomplete neighbor group, with C doubling as a passing tone connecting B flat to D flat, just as F was used as a passing and neighbor tone in the preceding phrase. In the sixth phrase, we hear the same core idea, only B flat has been substituted by its upper third, D flat, creating a descent from D flat to C. In the first embellishing layer, we hear arpeggiations of both G flat major and F minor. Notice that both arpeggios end with their respective structural tones. The arpeggiation of G flat ends with D flat just before the structural descent to C, and the arpeggiation of F minor ends with C, which will be followed by a currently unseen structural descent to B flat. In the second embellishing layer, we hear an anticipation of D flat, which is embellished by its lower neighbor tone, C. We also hear C used as a passing tone connecting D flat to B flat. In the seventh phrase, we hear the same information as the fifth phrase. As a result, we're going to move onward to the eighth and final phrase. Here, the core idea begins with D flat, the same as the sixth phrase. Rather than descend to C, however, it ascends to F. In the first embellishing layer, we hear D flat ascend to the upper voice, G flat. In the second embellishing layer, we hear anticipations embellished by lower neighbor tones. D flat moves to and from C, and F moves to and from E flat. Aside from these complete neighbor tones, we hear E flat used to embellish the ascent from D flat to G flat. Now that we have an understanding of the individual phrases measure to measure, we're ready to consider the melody from a global perspective. In the first phrase, we simply have F atop B flat minor, the 1. In the second phrase, we hear G flat and E flat atop C flat major, the flat 2. The two core ideas present are then repeated in the third and fourth phrases. In the fifth phrase, the music shifts to the submediant area and we hear B flat ascend to C atop G flat major and F minor, respectively. In the sixth phrase, we hear the same core idea atop G flat major and F minor, except that B flat is substituted by D flat. In the seventh phrase, we hear precisely the same core idea as the fifth phrase, but in the eighth phrase, we hear D flat ascend to F. Looking at the core ideas together, we can now see how either portions of phrases or entire phrases are prolongational. For instance, G flat and E flat in phrases 2 and 4 form prolongational neighbor tones of F, and in phrases 5, 6, and 7, C is used as a passing tone to connect B flat to D flat and vice versa. Notice that these prolongational tones coincide with the chords C flat major and F minor, thus reinforcing the notion made earlier that said chords are prolongational. Another interesting point is that the remaining structural tones all belong to the tonic triad B flat minor. Beginning at F, the melody ascends to B flat, moves to and from D flat, and ultimately ascends to F an octave above the initial F, resulting in a melody that both begins and ends on F structurally. Now that we have a better understanding of the melody from both the local and global perspectives, we are ready to listen to the theme once again. Before we do so, however, I want to point out a few more details regarding the melody, specifically how phrases are similar yet contrasting. In the first two phrases, the opening measures are essentially the same in design, with both being built around the use of lower neighbor tones. Leading into the second measures, however, differences arise. Each measure is preceded by D-flat, but each D-flat moves in a different direction. In the first phrase, D-flat descends to C, which begins a neighbor group surrounding D-flat, whereas in the second phrase it ascends to E-flat with D-flat itself acting as a neighbor tone. From here, both phrases ascend by leap to an upper neighbor tone, but each occurs in a different point metrically due to rhythmic variation. Leading into the final measures, both phrases proceed down by a fourth to a lower neighbor tone, but in the second phrase, this leap is subdivided by initially stepping down to F, which, as mentioned earlier in the analysis, operates as both a neighbor and passing tone. Following the resolution of these embellishing tones, a difference arises in that the first phrase ascends by a leap from B-flat to F, whereas the second phrase simply remains on E-flat. In the fifth and sixth phrases, B-flat ascends to D-flat and D-flat descends to B-flat, respectively. After arriving to their respective goals of motion, each melody descends by third. B-flat will then descend to F and begin an arpeggiation of F minor embellished with a passing tone, whereas the descent to G-flat in the sixth phrase will itself begin an arpeggiation of G-flat major. And lastly, in the seventh and eighth phrases, it can be said that the neighbor group formed by C and E-flat surrounding D-flat has been transposed and augmented rhythmically, resulting in E-flat leaping to G-flat, forming a neighbor group that surrounds F on a much larger scale. And with these ideas in mind, as well as the rest of the analysis, let's take another listen to the world map theme from Kingdom of the Dump and then bring this episode to a close.